In the early 1970s, the song Easy Loving exploded onto the scene. It turned Freddie Hart, the lead singer, from an unknown songwriter to an overnight superstar, though it took 25 years of hard work to create. But it's more than just a hit. It's the story of what happened next, when a man who had it all decided to quietly give it all up. Learn about the incredible life and mysterious disappearance of one of country's most unique voices. To truly understand the soul of Freddie Hart, you have to transport yourself back to the unforgiving red dirt of Loachapoka, Alabama, in the heart of the Great Depression. He was born Frederick Segrest in 1926, the son of sharecroppers, and he was one of 15 children. His world was not one of music and fanciful dreams, but of pure, unvarnished survival. The sharecropping system was a brutal, self-perpetuating cycle of debt and dependency, a modern form of feudalism. The family lived in a simple shack, and from the moment he could walk, Freddie's life was about back-breaking labor, picking cotton under the punishing southern sun, tending to animals, and trying to help stretch meager rations to feed a seemingly endless number of mouths. This was a childhood stripped of its innocence, defined by a poverty so profound it is hard for most of us to truly imagine today. There was no room for the luxury of a formal education. Freddie dropped out of school in the early grades, not out of rebellion, but out of stark necessity. The family needed another pair of hands in the fields, far more than they needed another head in a classroom. For a time, he joined the Civilian Conservation Corps, one of President Roosevelt's New Deal programs, planting trees and building roads for $1 a day. It was grueling work, but it was a step up. Yet, in the slivers of time between the exhaustion and the hunger, a seed was planted. He managed to get a mail-order guitar and, with no one to teach him, began to figure out the chords, the melodies offering a fleeting private escape from the harshness of his reality. As Freddie entered his teenage years, the world outside Alabama was plunging into the chaos of global war, and for a desperate, ambitious boy like him, the conflict represented something almost unthinkable, a way out. In 1941, even before the attack on Pearl Harbor thrust the United States into the war, the 15-year-old boy made a decision that would alter the course of his life forever. He walked into a recruitment office, lied about his age, claiming to be old enough to serve, and enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. He served as a combat Marine during some of the most ferocious and bloody island-hopping campaigns of World War II. He wasn't in a support role. He was on the front lines. He fought in the brutal campaigns to retake Guam and Iwo Jima. The experience forged him in fire. It instilled in him the unshakable discipline, the quiet toughness, and the fierce loyalty that would define his character for the rest of his life. The Marine Corps motto, Semper Fidelis, always faithful, became more than a slogan. It became his personal code. It was a promise he would keep to his country, his family, and, in the long decades of struggle that lay ahead, to his own seemingly impossible dream. While serving in the Pacific, he began writing songs, poems, and stories in earnest. It was a way to process the chaos, to hold on to his own humanity amidst the surrounding carnage. And it was here that he also honed a skill that would become a surprising and integral part of his identity for the rest of his life. He began studying martial arts. Under the tutelage of fellow Marines who had trained in Asia, he became proficient in hand-to-hand combat, discovering a focus and a spiritual center in the discipline. It was a private passion that seemed utterly at odds with the gentle, romantic balladeer he would one day become, but it spoke to the complex, resilient man being built by these extreme circumstances. He was already a warrior, a poet, and a survivor, long before he ever sang a single note on a record. When Freddie Hart came home from the war, he was a man in his early 20s with a lifetime of harsh experience crammed into a few short years, but with no clear path forward. The America he returned to was booming and optimistic, but for a young veteran with little education and no professional trade, the future was deeply uncertain. So he drifted. He took on any odd job he could find to make ends meet. He worked as a plumber's assistant. He leveraged his military training to teach self-defense, and through it all, he kept playing his guitar, honing his craft in smoky bars, dingy clubs, and any place that would let him on a stage. The dream of a life in music, born in the quiet moments of his Alabama childhood and nurtured in the chaos of war, was the one constant he held on to. He eventually made his way to Nashville in the early 1950s, the undisputed heart of the country music universe. But Nashville wasn't exactly rolling out the red carpet. The town was dominated by the raw, emotional, and often rowdy sounds of honky-tonk kings like Hank Williams, Ernest Tubb, and Lefty Frizzle. Freddie's voice, which was naturally smoother and more polished, and his songwriting, which often leaned toward the romantic, didn't quite fit the mold of the day. He was a square peg in a round hole. He managed to get signed and then subsequently dropped by a series of prominent labels, including Capitol and Columbia. The pattern was frustratingly consistent. He'd release a single, it might get a little bit of regional airplay, and then it would vanish without a trace. He was just another face in the crowd, one of 1,000 hopefuls arriving in Music City every year, looking for that one big break. But while he wasn't finding success as a performer, he was slowly but surely earning a reputation as a gifted songwriter. Other, more established artists started to notice his unique talent for turning a phrase and crafting an unforgettable melody. In 1954, the great Carl Smith had a massive #1 hit with a song Freddie wrote called Loose Talk, a classic country tune about the destructive power of small-town gossip. It was a breakthrough, but a bittersweet one. His name was on the record, but his face wasn't on the cover. Throughout the late 1950s and 1960s, his songs were recorded by an honor roll of industry giants. Porter Wagoner cut Skid Row. The legendary Patsy Cline recorded his song Lovin' in Vain. Even the great George Jones sang his tunes. Freddie was making a living, but it was a songwriter's living, modest and most of all, anonymous. He was the man behind the curtain, writing the hits that other people sang on the hallowed stage of the Grand Ole Opry, the very stage he dreamed of standing on himself. During this long, grueling period of professional frustration, he found the anchor that would steady his life. He met and married his wife, Ginger. She was his rock, a constant source of support and encouragement, believing in his talent even when the industry, and perhaps at times, Freddie himself, began to doubt. Theirs was a quiet, steadfast love, a stark contrast to the often turbulent and scandalous world of show business. They started a family, and Freddie continued his tireless routine, writing songs by day, playing thankless gigs by night, and teaching martial arts to supplement their income. He even opened his own school of self-defense in California, a practical application of the skills he'd learned as a Marine. He was a husband, a father, a teacher, and a musician, juggling 3 distinct lives at once, all in service of keeping his family afloat and his dream alive. To see your own songs become massive hits for other people, to get a taste of success only to have the door slammed shut again and again, to keep believing in yourself when you're well into your 40s and still haven't had a major hit of your own. Many, if not most, would have given up, chalked it up to a nice try, and settled into the more stable life of a teacher or a plumber's assistant. But Freddie Hart was a Marine. He simply didn't know how to quit. He remained always faithful to the dream. By 1971, his patience was running out, and so was his record labels. He was back at Capitol Records for another try, but his contract was on the line. His producers gave him an ultimatum. If his next single didn't make a significant impact on the charts, he was done. They were letting him go for good. The A-side of the record was a song called "The Whole World's Makin' Love Again." It was a decent song, but it wasn't catching fire. It seemed like the final disappointing end of a very long road. But on the B-side of that 45 RPM single, almost as an afterthought, was a simple little song Freddie had written a few years earlier. He'd scribbled the lyrics down on a greasy napkin in a coffee shop in about 20 minutes, inspired by the simple, comfortable, easy love he shared with his wife, Ginger. It was a song about how uncomplicated love can be when it's truly right. The song was Easy Loving. A radio DJ in Bakersfield, California, the heart of Buck Owens' territory, wasn't impressed with the A-side. On a whim, he decided to flip the record over and give the B-side a spin. And then the phone lines at the station lit up, and they didn't stop. Listeners were instantly captivated. It was a pure, unadulterated celebration of a happy, contented love, sung with a gentle sincerity that was impossible to fake. The station was inundated with requests. Other stations in other cities caught on, and the phenomenon began to spread across the country like wildfire. The song was a slow burn, taking months to climb the charts, but when it finally hit the top, it exploded. Easy Loving went to number 1 on the country charts and stayed there for 3 weeks. More astonishingly, it crossed over to the Billboard Hot 100 pop chart, peaking at number 17, a massive achievement for a country artist at the time. After 25 long years of knocking on the door, Freddie Hart had finally kicked it down. He was 45 years old, and he was an overnight success. The incredible success of Easy Loving was more than just a hit record. It was a cultural moment. It heralded the absolute peak of the Countrypolitan sound, a smoother, more orchestrated style that had been bubbling up from the more restrained Nashville sound of the 1960s. This was country music deliberately designed to appeal to a broader, more adult, and more urban audience, competing directly with the pop and easy listening music of the day. The raw fiddles and twangy steel guitars that defined traditional honky-tonk were softened, often replaced by lush string arrangements, orchestral swells, and gentle background singers. It was a polished, sophisticated production style that was perfectly suited for radio and romance. And Freddie Hart, with his smooth as silk voice and his unabashedly romantic themes, became the undisputed king of this sound. The floodgates that had been sealed shut for decades had burst open, and for the next few years, he was simply unstoppable. He followed the monumental success of Easy Loving with a stunning string of 6 consecutive number 1 hits, a remarkable run by any standard in any era. Songs like My Hang-Up Is You, Got the All-Overs for You, Bless Your Heart, and Superwoman all followed the same successful and beloved formula: unapologetically romantic lyrics, a smooth and deeply intimate vocal delivery, and that polished, string-laden production. His music was an oasis of tenderness in a genre that was so often defined by its rough edges. He was singing directly to the woman he loved, and millions of people across the world felt like he was singing their story too. He formed his touring band, appropriately named the Heartbeats, and became a fixture on the road and on television. He was officially inducted into the Grand Ole Opry in 1971, the ultimate honor in country music, and his warm, gentle presence became a regular and celebrated feature on its legendary stage. He appeared on talk shows hosted by Merv Griffin and Mike Douglas, and on variety shows like Hee Haw, a suave and perpetually smiling figure who seemed genuinely deeply humbled by his late-in-life success. After decades of struggle, he was finally reaping the rewards. He was living the dream he had so faithfully held on to for so long. But even at the dizzying height of his fame, Freddie Hart was different. His life wasn't a whirlwind of parties and tabloid headlines. It was still anchored by the two things that had always sustained him, his family and his discipline. He was utterly devoted to his wife, Ginger, the woman who had inspired his greatest hit and who had stood by him through all the lean, hungry years. In a world notorious for messy divorces and fleeting romances, their lifelong marriage was a rock of stability and a testament to the real-life easy loving he sang about. And his other, less public passion, martial arts, remained a core part of his identity. He achieved a high-ranking black belt in Kenpo karate and continued to teach and practice, even while touring as a major music star. It was a side of him the public rarely saw, this gentle balladeer who was also a disciplined, formidable warrior. It provided him with a sense of balance and an inner peace that was perhaps essential for navigating the dizzying, often disorienting world of superstardom. He once remarked in a rare interview, "The martial arts teaches you to be in control of yourself. You learn to control your temper, your emotions. It has been a great help to me in the music business, which can be a very frustrating world." That was an understatement. For most of the 1970s, Freddie Hart was on top of that world. He had carved out a unique and massively popular space for himself, proving beyond any doubt that there was a huge audience for country music that was soft, romantic, and optimistic. He had brought the love song from the private corners of the heart to the grand public stage of the Opry, and in doing so, had undeniably changed the sound of country music for a generation. In the world of popular music, no trend, however popular, lasts forever. As the 1970s wore on and began to bleed into the 1980s, the stylistic ground began to shift under Freddie Hart's feet. The polished, string-drenched Countrypolitan sound that he had so masterfully perfected started to fall out of fashion. A new wave of artists, the outlaw movement, was rising to prominence. Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, David Allan Coe, and Johnny Paycheck brought a grittier, more rebellious, and rock and roll influenced sound back to the forefront of country music. Their songs were about independence, defiance, and living life on their own terms. A sonic and thematic universe away from the contented domestic bliss of Freddie's romantic ballads. His last #1 hit came in 1976 with Why Lovers Turn to Strangers. He continued to have minor chart success into the early 1980s, but the incredible momentum was gone. The radio stations that had once played his songs on a continuous loop were now spinning the latest from George Strait or Randy Travis, leaders of the new traditionalist movement that sought to return country music to its more rustic, honky-tonk roots. Suddenly, Freddie's smooth, sophisticated style, which had once been the cutting edge, sounded dated to a new generation of listeners. The industry that had finally grudgingly embraced him was now just as decisively moving on without him. This is a familiar, often tragic story in the music business. Tastes change, stars fade. But what happened next with Freddie Hart is precisely what makes his story so unique and so compelling. He didn't desperately try to change his sound to fit the new trends. He didn't launch a bitter public campaign against the industry that was leaving him behind. He didn't cling desperately to the last vestiges of his fame, playing smaller and smaller venues until he became a caricature of himself. Instead, he did something remarkable, something almost unheard of for a star of his magnitude. He quietly, gracefully, and deliberately walked away. He never officially announced a retirement. There was no splashy farewell tour or final album. He simply began to scale back his public life year by year until it was almost non-existent. He and his wife Ginger had built a comfortable life for themselves in Burbank, California, far from the insular, high-pressure world of the Nashville music machine. And it was there, back home, that he turned his full attention back to his other passions. He had co-founded the Freddie Hart Jean LaBelle Self-Defense School, and he poured his energy back into it, finding deep and lasting fulfillment in teaching martial arts to people in his local community. He was no longer a superstar. He was a sensei, a teacher, a respected local business owner. In his later years, he and Ginger moved to Arizona, seeking an even quieter and more private existence. He would occasionally perform, sometimes at reunion shows in Branson or on country music cruises where his loyal older fans would gather to hear the classics. But his public appearances became increasingly rare. To the modern music world, he had become something of a ghost, a name from a bygone era. Younger country fans might not have even known who he was, even as they inadvertently heard his songs covered by other artists or played on classic country stations late at night. He had achieved the absolute pinnacle of success and then made the conscious decision that a life of personal peace was infinitely more valuable than a life of perpetual fame. He chose his family over his fans, tranquility over touring. It was the final and perhaps the greatest act of a man who had always been in control of himself. And then it happened. When Freddie Hart died on October the 27th, 2018, he wasn't on a glittering stage in Nashville. He was in Burbank, California, the city he had called home for decades. He had lived a full life, reaching the age of 91, and had passed away after a brief battle with pneumonia. More importantly, he didn't die alone. By his side was his beloved wife, Ginger, his partner for nearly 70 years, from the days of obscurity to the heights of fame and the quiet years that followed. His passing was not just the end of a career, but also the end of one of country music's greatest and most enduring love stories. In the world of true country music, his passing was a devastating loss. The Grand Ole Opry, where he was a lifetime member, sent heartfelt condolences. Classic country music magazines, websites, and radio stations dedicated articles and programs to his legacy, reminding people of the one-time King of Love songs. But in the grand scheme of entertainment, the news of his death was a minor blip. There was no nationwide outpouring of grief, no 24-hour news coverage. It was a quiet, unassuming departure, a reflection of his dignity. With easy loving, he took Countrypolitan to its peak. His sound, with its lush strings, soft backing vocals, and carefully crafted production, proved that country music could be both romantic and sophisticated without losing its soul. But perhaps his greatest legacy, even greater than the music, is his life story. It's a masterclass in perseverance. His 25-year overnight success story has become an endless source of inspiration. His life is a testament to the fact that if you keep believing, the door will eventually open. The story of Freddie Hart is a perfect circle, a ballad of a life fulfilled. It is a boy's journey from the cotton fields of Alabama to the bloody shores of Iwo Jima, from anonymous smoke-stained bars to the bright spotlight of the Grand Ole Opry. And then, by his own choice, he steps from that blinding light into the peaceful shadows of a quiet life.